Wait, Priya said, wine glass halfway to her mouth. You didn't know she went to Miami too? The table went quiet in that specific way tables go quiet when someone said something they weren't supposed to say. Marcus's fork stopped moving. Priya's face did the thing faces do half a second too late, the realization arriving right behind the sentence instead of before it. Miami, I repeated. Just the word. Flat. For the, Priya looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his plate. The conference. Nicole's conference. I thought, she said you knew, I swear, I thought you. She had a marketing conference in Charlotte last week, I said. That's what she told me. Nobody said anything for a second. Somewhere behind me, Theo's high chair squeaked as he kicked his feet against it, humming to himself, the only person at that table still having a normal Tuesday. I need to check something, I said, and I got up from the table, and that was the last full sentence I said out loud for the rest of that dinner. 6 years married. 8 together if you count college, back when Nicole Ashford used to fall asleep with her head on my chest in my dorm room, half a psychology textbook open on the floor, and I'd stay awake another hour just so I wouldn't have to stop feeling her breathe. I teach history at the high school 2 miles from our house. I coach JV football in the fall. I am, by nature and by profession, a person who trusts the primary source. Someone tells me where they were, I believe them, because believing people is easier than building a case against them, and because a marriage where you check receipts isn't a marriage you actually want, is it? That's what I used to think. I don't think that anymore. Nicole does marketing for a regional healthcare network. She's good at her job in the specific way people are good at jobs that require making other people feel understood. She reads a room in 4 seconds and adjusts. She used to do that with me too, in the early years. I used to think it was intimacy. I've had to reconsider what it actually was. We have a son, Theo. 4 years old, obsessed with dinosaurs in the specific, encyclopedic way only 4-year-olds manage, could tell you the difference between a theropod and a raptor before he could tie his shoes. Nicole loves him. I want to say that clearly, at the start, because nothing that follows changes that fact, even though it complicates almost everything else. I should say who Derek is, because he matters to this story more than anyone except Nicole and me. Derek Whitlow. Nicole's college boyfriend, 2 years, ended right before she and I got together, not because of me. I want to be clear, they were over before I was ever a factor. He moved to Miami for work not long after graduation, some sales role that turned into a director role that turned, eventually, into money. Nicole mentioned him maybe 4 times in 8 years. Old news, filed away, the way you file away every person you loved before the person you married. I never thought about Derek Whitlow. Why would I? He was a name from before, a door that had been closed for a decade. I didn't know the door had been quietly reopened on Instagram 18 months ago, a comment on an old college photo, small world, right, that turned into a DM, that turned into, well. That's the part one had to reconstruct later, piece by piece, because Nicole never volunteered a single word of it to me. Looking back, the first flag was so small I didn't even register it as a flag at the time, I registered it as nothing at all, which is exactly how the good ones get past you. About a year ago, Nicole started using her phone differently. Not more, differently. She used to leave it face up on the counter, screen unlocked half the time, pin she'd told me years ago and never bothered to change. Sometime last spring, it started living face down. I noticed. I didn't ask. I told myself everyone gets more private about their phone eventually, that it didn't mean anything, that reading meaning into a phone's orientation was the kind of paranoid behavior I didn't want to become. I want to be honest, some small, quiet part of me clocked it as odd in real time and I overruled that part on purpose, because questioning it felt like an accusation I didn't have grounds to make yet, and I have always preferred not making accusations to being right. Around the same time, Nicole got serious about the gym. Not in a way that alarmed me. People get serious about the gym, it's a normal thing people do, but it was sudden, and it came with new workout clothes, and a new haircut, lighter, longer, more expensive than her usual trims. She said she wanted to feel like herself again after Theo. She said 32 felt different than 30 had, that she didn't like what motherhood had quietly done to how she saw her own body in the mirror. I told her she looked great. I meant it. I also, somewhere underneath meaning it, felt a small strange hum of unease that I couldn't name and didn't investigate, because investigating my wife's motivation for wanting to feel good in her own skin felt like the kind of ungenerous thought a good husband shouldn't have. That's the pattern I missed for months. Everything she was doing had a perfectly reasonable explanation on its own. It only stopped being reasonable once you lined all the reasonable things up next to each other and noticed they were all pointing the same direction. October. A work trip to Charlotte, 3 days, a marketing conference she said her company sent 2 people to every year. I drove her to the airport myself. Kissed her at the curb. Told Theo his mom would be home Thursday and he asked, with total 4-year-old sincerity, if she was bringing him a dinosaur from the airport gift shop, and she laughed and promised she would, and I remember thinking, watching her walk into the terminal, that I had a good life. An easy, uncomplicated, good life. She texted from the hotel that night. A photo of a hotel lobby, marble floor, tasteful chandelier. Charlotte Marriott, very fancy for a marketing conference LOL. I sent back a thumbs up. Normal. Nothing. She called Theo before bed each night of the trip, on video, and he showed her his newest dinosaur drawing through the screen, and she said all the right mom things, and I stood in the doorway watching my son talk to his mother on a phone and felt, again, that this was a good life, an easy one, nothing to examine. She flew home Thursday. I picked her up. She brought Theo a small stuffed stegosaurus from what she said was the hotel gift shop. He named it Steggy within the hour and slept with it every night after that. I did not know, standing at that curb picking her up, that the version of the trip she'd told me had almost nothing to do with the version that actually happened. I would learn that 7 days later, at Marcus and Priya's dinner table, from a woman who had absolutely no idea she was detonating anything when she said it. I want to walk through what I pieced together after that dinner, because it matters, not for drama's sake, but because I need you to understand how completely a lie can be built when the person telling it knows exactly which details you'll never think to check. The marketing conference in Charlotte was real. It existed. Her company had, in fact, sent 2 employees there that week, but the second employee, a coworker named Ben, later told me, when I finally worked up the nerve to ask him directly, that Nicole had skipped the second and third day of sessions entirely, citing a migraine, and that he'd assumed she was resting in her room. She wasn't in her room. She was on a flight to Miami that same afternoon, the one where she supposedly had a migraine, and she was back in Charlotte by the following evening in time to fly home with Ben the next morning, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't spent 30 hours somewhere else entirely with someone else entirely. The hotel lobby photo, marble floor, chandelier, I found out much later, from the metadata, wasn't the Charlotte Marriott at all. It was a hotel in Brickell. She'd sent me a photo from Miami and told me it was Charlotte, and I'd looked at marble and a chandelier and believed whatever she told me it was, because why would I ever think to doubt a picture of a lobby? The nightly video calls with Theo were real too, that's the detail that still sits strangest with me. She'd FaceTime our son from a hotel room in Miami she told me was in North Carolina, show him her actual physical location without a single visible tell, ask about his dinosaur drawing while, presumably, a man I'd never met sat somewhere just out of frame, or in the next room, or wherever he was. I don't know exactly where Derek was during those calls. I know she made them anyway, and I know Theo has no idea, to this day, that anything about those calls wasn't exactly what it looked like. The Stegosaurus was real too. Bought at Miami International, not a Charlotte hotel gift shop. My son has slept with a souvenir from his mother's affair every night for the past 2 months and doesn't know it, and some nights I still can't decide if that fact is sad or just unbearably strange. Back to that Tuesday dinner, because that's where the real story starts, even though everything before it is what made the story possible. I excused myself from the table, told Marcus and Priya I needed to check on something at home, some half-invented reason about Theo's babysitter, and I don't think anyone at that table believed me, including Theo, who at 4 still somehow read the room well enough to go quiet in his high chair. I drove home faster than I should have. Nicole was at a team happy hour, she'd said, expected home by 9. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened the shared photo cloud we'd set up years ago, back when we were young and unguarded enough to want every photo automatically backed up and shared, no thought given to what that backup might someday reveal. I searched Miami. Just the word, typed into the search bar of our shared photo library, the way you'd search for a receipt or a boarding pass. 14 photos came back. Timestamped the week of her Charlotte trip. A hotel balcony with ocean visible in the corner. A cocktail on a bar with a name I didn't recognize written in chalk behind it, some rooftop place. And one photo, clearly not meant to sync, clearly taken by someone else and shared to her, that showed her laughing, head tipped back, next to a man I recognized immediately even though I'd only ever seen him in old, half-forgotten photos from before I knew her. Derek Whitlow. Older than the college photos. Same easy, watch-wearing confidence Marcus Doyle probably had, the confidence of men who've never once had to explain themselves to anyone. I sat at that table for a long time. Long enough that the light changed outside the window. I didn't cry, not that first night. I want to be honest that what I felt first wasn't grief, it was something closer to vertigo, the physical sensation of a floor you trusted turning out to be much thinner than you thought. I didn't confront her the second she walked through the door at 9:15. I want to explain why, because it's the choice this whole story turns on. I've never been a person who forces a confrontation before he's ready for what comes out of it. Some people would call that weakness. I've started calling it something closer to self-preservation. If I'd stood in that doorway and screamed the second she walked in, she'd have had the advantage of surprise on her side, the chance to cry first, to explain first, to control which version of this story got told before I'd even had time to understand what I actually knew. So I closed the laptop. I told her the dinner had been good, that Marcus and Priya said hi, that Theo went down easy. I let her tell me about her happy hour, some story about a coworker's bad Tinder date that under any other circumstance would have made me laugh. I lay next to her that night and didn't sleep, staring at the ceiling, running the timeline again and again. March, the phone flipping face down. Spring, the sudden gym obsession, the new haircut. October, the migraine, in Charlotte. I felt something cold settle into place, piece by piece, the way ice forms on a window from the corners inward. Something shifted in me that night that I couldn't name yet. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to resolve. I spent the next 4 days building what I needed instead of saying what I knew. I want to be honest that this wasn't strategy in the beginning, it started as simple disbelief, a need to understand the actual shape of what I was dealing with before I let myself feel any of it fully. It became strategy somewhere around day 2. I pulled our joint credit card statements and found 2 charges I'd never questioned before because they'd always looked ordinary, a $340 charge from a rideshare company on the day of her migraine, routed from downtown Charlotte to the Charlotte airport, a route that made sense only if you already knew she'd caught a flight that afternoon she claimed to be sick in bed. And a smaller charge, $19, from an airline seat selection fee, on a flight I found, with some searching, still listed in her email as a booking confirmation she'd apparently forgotten to delete, a same-day round trip, Charlotte to Miami and back, under her own name. She'd left the confirmation email sitting in her inbox for 2 months. I don't think she ever imagined I'd think to look. That's the thing about a trusting husband, you can get careless with him in ways you'd never get careless with someone who checks. I called Ben, her coworker from the conference, on a pretext about expensing something from the trip. He mentioned, easily, without any idea what he was actually telling me, that Nicole had skipped 2 full days of sessions with a migraine and he hadn't seen her again until the flight home the next morning. He said it the way you say something completely unremarkable. To him, it was. I found the 14 photos in the shared cloud again, studied them properly this time instead of in shock, the rooftop bar, the balcony, the one photo of the 2 of them together that someone else, presumably Derek's friend or a bartender, had taken and shared to Nicole's phone, and which had synced automatically to a shared library she'd forgotten still fed my account too. By the fourth day, I had what Renata, a divorce attorney a colleague at school had recommended 2 years earlier during her own split, whose card I'd kept in my desk for no reason I could ever explain until now, called, when I finally called her, an unusually clean paper trail for someone who thought he wasn't looking for one. I want to talk about Theo for a moment, because he's the part of this that still costs me the most. He still slept with Steggy every night. He still asked, some mornings, when mommy was going to take him on a plane trip like she took for work, because in his 4-year-old mind, a plane trip sounded like the best thing in the world, better than dinosaurs even. He had no idea that the stuffed animal he loved most had been bought in an airport that shouldn't have existed in his mother's story, that the video calls he remembered fondly had happened in a city she'd never told either of us she was in. I remember tucking him in on the 4th night, watching him hug that dinosaur to his chest, and thinking, with a clarity that scared me a little, whatever happens next, I need this house to stay steady under his feet even while it stops being steady under mine. That was the moment I understood the difference between what I was allowed to feel and what I was allowed to do about it in front of him. Day 5. A Saturday. Nicole had a haircut appointment in the morning, which felt, by then, almost too on the nose given everything I'd learned about the timeline of her transformation over the past year. Theo was at my mother's for the afternoon. The house was quiet in the specific way houses get quiet right before something in them changes permanently. She came home around 1, hair freshly done, and found me sitting at the kitchen table with a folder, actual paper, printed statements, the airline confirmation, one printed photo from the cloud, because I wanted her to see it in a form she couldn't argue was a misunderstanding or a bad angle or taken out of context. "What's this?" she said, though something in her voice already knew. People always know, I've learned, in the half-second before they're forced to know. "Miami," I said. "Not Charlotte. Miami. With Derek." She went very still. I watched her face do the thing Priya's had done at dinner 5 days earlier, the realization landing half a beat behind the words, except this time there was nowhere left to walk it back to. "How long have you known?" she asked, quiet. "Since Tuesday. Since Priya said something she didn't know was a secret." Nicole sat down slowly across from me. She didn't reach for the folder. She didn't need to. "I can explain the trip," she started, and I want to be honest that I let her, because I'd decided days earlier that I wanted to hear whatever she was going to say, not because I needed it to change anything, but because I thought I deserved, after everything, to at least hear the shape of her reasoning. "It wasn't supposed to be anything," she said. "He messaged me last year, just, catching up, nothing, and then it kept going, and I don't know when it stopped being nothing. I think some part of me wanted to feel like the person I was before all of this," she gestured, vaguely, at the house, at the life, at everything that wasn't her anymore. "Before Theo. Before being someone's wife and someone's mom and nothing else. Derek looked at me the way he used to look at me at 22, and I missed being looked at like that." "You could have told me you felt invisible," I said. "You never once told me that. Would you have believed me? Or would you have said I looked great and gone back to grading papers?" That landed, and I want to be honest about that too, it landed because there was some truth buried in it, even wrapped around a betrayal the size of hers. I had told her she looked great during the gym phase instead of asking why she suddenly needed to. I had been a comfortable, trusting husband who mistook comfort for connection for longer than I want to admit. But comfort and connection failing doesn't manufacture Miami. It doesn't manufacture a lie sustained across a marketing conference, a stuffed dinosaur, and 4 nightly FaceTime calls to our son from a hotel room she told 2 different people 2 different lies about. I understood, sitting there, that her unmet need was real and her response to it was still, entirely, a choice she'd made and remade for over a year, one lie at a time. "Is it still going on?" I asked. "Right now?" She hesitated exactly as long as the hesitation before her lawyer would later call mine asking about keeping things amicable. "I don't know what it is anymore," she said, which wasn't a no. I didn't yell. I want to say that plainly, because I think it surprised her as much as my composure had surprised Claire in a different story like this one, the absence of the reaction she'd braced for. I felt something colder than anger sitting in my chest, something closer to clarity. "I'm not going to fight you for the house today," I said. "I'm not going to decide anything today. But I need you to understand I already know everything, and I'm not going to spend the next month listening to a version of this that isn't true." "So what happens now?" she asked, and for the first time since I'd known her, Nicole Ashford Bennett didn't have the next sentence already prepared. She'd built an entire second life on the assumption that I'd never think to look. She hadn't built a plan for the version of me who did. "I called Renata that Monday. I want to say, honestly, that I didn't walk into her office already certain I wanted a divorce. Some part of me was still turning over Nicole's answer about feeling invisible, still trying to decide whether a year-long affair with a college ex, sustained by dozens of small deliberate lies, was a marriage that could survive being repaired, or a marriage that had already quietly ended the moment the first DM got answered instead of ignored. Renata was direct with me in a way I needed. "You don't have to decide today whether you're filing," she said. "But you should protect yourself financially and legally regardless of what you decide about the marriage itself. Those are two separate decisions, and people conflate them all the time to their own detriment. I want to be honest that I haven't fully decided, even now, exactly what the next year of my life looks like. I know some things. I know Theo comes first, always, in every decision that follows. I know I've started individual therapy, something I'd resisted for years out of the same instinct that kept me from questioning the face-down phone, the belief that examining things too closely was its own kind of betrayal, that trust meant never looking. I understand now that trust and refusal to look aren't the same thing at all. One is a gift you give someone who's earned it. The other is just fear, dressed up as virtue." Nicole moved into her sister's place 2 towns over, a temporary arrangement while we figure out what comes next, legally, practically, for Theo's sake. Derek, as far as I know, is still in Miami, still going about a life that never had to absorb any of the consequences that landed on Nicole's. His name never appeared on a single document. His marriage, he has one, it turns out, something Nicole either didn't know or didn't mention, never got the phone call Priya's slip gave to mine. If there's a reckoning coming for him, it isn't one I'll get to witness, and I've had to make a strange kind of peace with that some people who do real damage never face a consequence anyone can see, and that isn't a flaw in the universe I get to fix. It's just a fact I have to carry. Nicole's job is intact, for now, though the story has quietly made its way through enough of our shared social circle that I don't think it stays contained much longer. Small towns and small professional circles don't hold secrets as well as the people inside them hope. Priya has apologized to me more times than I can count for the slip at dinner, and I've told her, honestly, that she gave me something I would have needed to find eventually anyway, just months sooner than I would have found it on my own. I don't think she believes me when I say I'm not angry at her. I mean it anyway. I keep coming back to that phone flipping face down on the counter last spring, the moment I noticed and chose not to ask about. I had almost a year's worth of small, quiet information available to me, and I spent that year building elaborate, generous explanations for every piece of it instead of asking one direct question. That's the first thing I have to sit with, not that I trusted my wife, but that I mistook not asking for trust, when really it was just fear of what asking might cost me. The second thing is smaller, and it took me longer to see. I told her she looked great during the gym phase, the haircut, the whole transformation, and I meant it, but I never once asked what she was trying to outrun by transforming so suddenly. I complimented the surface and never once knocked on the door underneath it. I think, if I'd asked that question honestly back in the spring, not suspicious, just curious, just present, I might have gotten an answer that started this conversation 8 months earlier than a slip at a dinner table did. The turning point wasn't Priya's sentence at that table, though that's the moment I remember with the most physical clarity, my own fork frozen halfway, the sudden silence. The real turning point was smaller and came later, alone at my kitchen table with a laptop open to a shared photo library, the choice to look instead of ask, to build a case instead of demand an explanation. That decision is the one I still turn over the most, because it wasn't born from strength. It was born from the same fear that had kept me from asking questions all year. I just finally aimed the fear at gathering the truth instead of avoiding it. The strangest part of this story isn't the affair itself. Affairs happen, people fall into things they don't fully understand until they're already inside them. The strangest part is how completely a marriage can run on two people's separate, private theories about what the other one needs, neither theory ever spoken aloud, both of them wrong in ways that compounded for over a year. Nicole believed I'd never really see her if she said the truth out loud. I believed asking hard questions was itself a kind of disrespect. We were both protecting a version of peace that had already stopped being real a long time before Priya said Miami out loud at that dinner table. What strikes me now, months later, is how much of this ran on infrastructure we'd built together in the early, trusting years of our marriage, a shared photo cloud set up in 2019 with no thought given to what it might one day reveal, an old joint understanding that neither of us needed to check up on the other. The very things that made our marriage feel safe for 6 years were the same things that made her double life possible for one, and that made it discoverable, eventually, almost by accident, through a system built entirely on the assumption that we had nothing to hide from each other. I don't think Nicole set out, at the start, to build a year-long deception. I think she answered one message she should have ignored, and then made 100 smaller choices after that, each one slightly easier than the one before it, each one moving the goalposts of what she considered acceptable a little further out. That's usually how it goes, I've come to understand, not one catastrophic decision, but a long accumulation of smaller permissions granted to yourself in private, until the distance between where you started and where you've ended up is too far to explain honestly in one sitting. What I keep returning to is this: the version of Nicole who felt invisible was telling the truth about that feeling, even while everything she did in response to it was a lie. Both things can be true at once, and learning to hold both without letting one excuse the other has been the hardest part of untangling this, harder even than the discovery itself. Which leaves the question I still carry into every version of the next chapter one try to imagine, whether a marriage that ran for 6 years on unspoken assumptions was ever really the marriage I thought it was, or just the most comfortable story two people had agreed, without ever discussing it, to keep telling each other.